When a mother loves her child, everything feels safe. But what happens when she doesn't? Welcome to the Embarrassing Diary. Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of The Embarrassing Diary. In today's episode, I have the great pleasure to have an amazing and super talented singer, actress, lecturer, and author of the book Chameleon Flickan, or in the English version, Butterfly, and she will analyze her story through her childhood eyes, and she will tell us a little bit more about how she experienced growing up in a highly dysfunctional family. And before we say anything, trigger warning. We are going to analyze some very sensitive topics such as self-harm, eating disorders, being in abusive relationships. So please, if you feel triggered by any of those topics, seek professional help. But in any case, if you're not, I hope it will mean something to you as it meant for my guest today. So without further ado, let's welcome to the conversation, Erika Dittmer. Hello, Erika. Welcome to the show.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Yeah, it's really a pleasure to have you here today. I'm so thrilled that you're here with us. First of all, can you give us a little bit of a background?
Well, I'm Swedish by birth. I was born in Stockholm, and I was born into a family with addiction problems and all sorts of dysfunctional issues. So, one of the strategies that I had to survive was to create an English alter ego. So, I created this happy world bubble where all my imaginary friends were English. I was English. Everything was always lovely in that imaginary world. And obviously, in the beginning, when I was tiny, I didn't speak English. It's not my first language. So I sounded pretty much like the Swedish chef, I think, on the Muppet Show, for those of you who are old enough to know that. But in English, I sort of mimicked what I thought was English words and the melody. And then little by little, I added proper English words into that melody. So by the time I was 8 or 9 years old, I was fluent, self-taught and fluent in English. So this sort of alternative Erika, the English version of myself, has always been a very strong part of me. But I guess because it was a survival technique as well, it was almost as if I pushed that exterior. It was almost as if I thought that if I'm only in that English bubble, then all the horribleness that I was experiencing and feeling wouldn't catch up with me. So fast forward, I'm now 51, but it took me until I was way over 30 before I started to realize that I had to somehow get help in merging all of these different facets of me. And it's not as if I was delusional. I knew that I was a Swedish Erika too, but I wasn't ready to be her, to embody all that she had and what she carried and what she stood for, as it were. Um,
Yeah.
well, yeah, that's a little bit about me, apart from all the professional
Yeah.
aspects. And yeah.
Yeah. Actually, in the book, you're describing this unhealthy environment. From the beginning, I felt for me it was very harsh to read it because I'm a mother
Wow.
myself. So I could understand, like, from a kid's perspective, oh, that's actually harsh.
Mm.
If you want, I can read a small part of it that you mentioned, if you're okay with that, of
Yes,
course.
absolutely.
I have the English version. And it's you talk about your mother being inside of a large sphere. So I'm gonna read
Wow.
it. Um, Mother is inside a large sphere made out of jello. She's drunk or high or both. She has that sexy smirk on her face, just like when the men are visiting. I am outside the sphere. She doesn't see me. She never sees me. I want her to see me, to admit that I exist, that I mean something to her. Get some kind of indication that she cares about me, that she's proud of me, happy that she decided to keep me and not abort me all that time ago. Time after time, I tried to get her to see me, to hear me, to step out of the jealous sphere and be real. I want her to look at me, to hear me, listen to me, talk to me without the intoxication, without the men as an audience. But the more I try to reach her, to get inside the sphere or find a hole to pull her out of it, the more intoxicated she gets, the more hilarious she finds it in all. Then the sudden flash, the deep realization that I'm the only one that laughs at, that it is my panic and terror that amuse her, that she enjoys seeing me this way, that she loves to see me lonely and powerless, that seeing me that way gives her strength, that she doesn't love me, never has, that in fact she hates me.
Mm.
Oh my god! When I read that, I was very, I was surprised. I was really, and I'm not an expert. I don't know a lot of things about mental health from the expert opinion. But as another human being, I would like to apologize for what you went through, because that's something that nobody needs to go through. Um,
Mm.
how did you write that? Is it something that I'm guessing it really happened? But how did you write the book? Yeah, tell me a little
But
bit
that
about the book.
particular excerpt that you read, thank you for reading it as well, was a dream. It was a dream that I had for every night for about 6 months. And later on, about 2 years afterwards, I happened to meet at a social event, I happened to meet a dream interpreter. She's written several books on the topic.
Mm,
And I happened to be alone with her during one moment. And I said, a few years ago, I had this very horrible dream that woke me up every morning in palpitations and sweats. And then it just stopped. And she looked at me, and I didn't tell her what the dream was. I didn't say anything more than that, but I guess she could read between the lines. And she said, well, more most likely, she said, without knowing anything else but what you're saying now, you managed to solve the issue that your psyche is trying to deal
mm,
with yourself. But because you didn't have help, it took 6 months for you to sort of live through that and come to terms with all of those feelings. But yes, it was a very stark realization to
yeah.
realize that, oh, the person that is meant to nourish you actually wants you dead.
Yeah.
It's a very it's yeah, it's you can't even attempt to feel it. And I know it's not entirely true. I think she was very conflicted. She had me when she was very young. She met my dad. They fell in love. He was older. They obviously had sex because I was conceived, and but that was never part of the plan. And he didn't. He comes
Mm,
from a sort of semi-religious home. He didn't want to go through with an abortion, but sort of persuaded my very unwilling mother to become a mother. And then when it was too late to abort, he sort of, not left her, but he did. He abandoned her with the pregnancy. He just thought, well, I'm older. I need to do my thing now. She has her time later. But she felt
mm,
angry with him. And then, of course, that anger was projected onto me as well. Do you see what I mean? So I was sort of to blame for everything bad that happened. But in her
yeah.
defense, and I think this comes with age and the fact that I pulled off so many layers and have healed so much. She was abused as a child. My
Mm,
maternal grandmother was when she passed, I was sort of relieved. My oldest uncle, who died last year, he was handed to the social services by my maternal grandmother, by his mother, because he was too, she didn't like him. He was then two,
mm,
like, a 2-year old. And she basically went to the doctors and said, he's an evil child. Can you, kill him? Just like you put down a dog,
mm.
right? There's something wrong with this dog. Can we, kill it? And this doctor was shocked. There were medical records from this. And the doctor was shocked and said, that's not how it works. Well, in that case, I want to give him up for adoption or just put him away somewhere and throw away the key. So he was put in an orphanage, and that it's unfortunately, wow, what a life story he has or had. That orphanage later became in Sweden infamous because it was all the children that were there were physically and sexually abused
Oh
pretty
my
much on a
gosh.
daily basis. So that was my uncle. So, and of course, my mother was only a few years. She was what, 4 when this happened, 3, 4, 5, and my uncle was 3, I think. Um, can you imagine the terror that must have put in her? She has no reason why her brother is suddenly not there anymore. It was never talked about. I think it was a lie in the beginning that he was, too difficult to handle. So someone else was look after
Yeah,
him like another family. But can you imagine what that
yeah.
will do to someone who knows too that, oh, my mother isn't, she doesn't love any of us. Why did she pick my brother why did she get rid of my brother and not me? Oh, I better not say anything, obviously, because otherwise me too, I will be left. So that's her baggage. it was tough because she never dealt with it. She's tried to self-heal through alcohol and drugs. And that's never a great solution. It doesn't really solve anything. So when I came along, and then my biological father abandoned her with this baby that she didn't want, of course, that's not the basis for. In an ideal fairy tale world, that would have been her wake-up call to get her up in gear,
Yeah.
but it wasn't, and that's how
Yeah.
it is. So the book came about. I actually started writing it way back in 2007. And at
Mm-hmm.
this point, I have lived in England for a very long time, and I've been in an abusive relationship, and which, I guess was an extension of my mother and the fact that I wasn't healed, so I was beating myself up. So he only became like an external partner who continued that beating myself up. So I had left him. I had sworn I would never be in another relationship, that I would be a nun. uh, it, that has
Yeah.
changed, but it took a while. But I had sworn that I would become a nun, that I would never be with a man ever again. It was safer that way. And I thought, I'm now ready to embrace my Swedishness. So I planned to move back home to Sweden. And lo and behold, this Portuguese, French, American production company, I had managed to be home in Stockholm for about 2 months when they phoned me up and said, "Oh, you know what? We have this huge Cirque show in Portugal, and we have our opening night in a week. And the lead singer, we had to fire her because she was too fat. Uh,
Oh
but
my
we
God.
found you. So could you come on a plane now, please?" And I just thought, this must be a joke. And I said to this producer, I said, "Well, define what you mean by firing somebody for being fat. What was her size?" "Oh, she was bigger than you." And I'm like, "No, I'm fairly normal built, so in musical theater world, I'm on the bigger side, because in the film world and on stage, it's notorious for having a lot of people that are suffering from eating disorders and that are quite small." And he
Mm.
said, "Oh, I'm sure you'll be fine. You have to fit into the dresses." And I thought, "Oh, okay, here we go." So I got the measurements, and yeah, they would fit. And I checked them out, and they were completely legit. So I laughed and I said, "Well, okay, so much for my Swedish return." So in January
Okay.
2007, I packed my bags for a nine-month contract as a lead singer in a Cirque show in Portugal, just outside of Lisbon. And whilst I was there, I woke up one morning and I had 2 or 3 chapters in my head, like ready.
Mm-hmm.
It was almost as if I could see the text on a piece of paper. And it was such a strong, yeah,
Epiphany.
exactly,
Yeah.
that I opened up my laptop that I had, and it was almost as if I took dictation. So I typed as fast as I could and then continued. So in the beginning, I wrote in English, and it was called Butterfly, which is the same title as it is now, because it's still that the embryo was born there. Since
Mm-hmm.
then, it has morphed into, because after that stint in Portugal, I did move back to Sweden. And I realized that underneath all of the having had an autoimmune illness and having had that baggage from the abusive man and everything, was also a very deeply set eating disorder and self-harm. Because
Mm.
self-harm, when we say self-harm, most people think of cutting yourself, right? But self-harm is broader than that. Self-harm is also putting yourself in dangerous situations. Check that. Being in abusive relationships. Check that. Not caring if you eat dangerous food, because if you get sick or perhaps die, it's only a bonus, right? So I did all of that.
Oh.
As
Oh,
Yeah.
wow.
So you could argue that, me taking nightly walks at 3 a.m. in a notoriously dangerous area in London is part of that psychological
Mm.
makeup, coupled with having a very severe eating disorder that was already developed by the time I started school at the age of 6. So when 2008 hit, I suddenly realized that I can't go on existing like this. I don't live, I try to function in my life, and it doesn't function. This food monster, another entity that I had created, I couldn't keep that entity at bay. It left me alone temporarily when it felt like, oh, I it's not here anymore. Hallelujah.
Mm.
And then of course, boom, it'd be there. So I was almost chained to this imaginary monster that possessed me at times. So I sought help and I was accepted into
Mhm.
this clinic in Stockholm, a 4 month, very intense clinic and sort of rehab, as it were. And then during those 4 months, I also had one on one coaching. And she said, 4 months won't be enough for you. You will need to find a therapist and continue your healing. So, yeah,
Oh.
so I did. But then when I started working with my therapist after the clinic, she and I started to unravel this whole English entity and the fact that I had written English and felt almost more comfortable communicating with people in English rather than Swedish. And little by little, we
Mm.
peeled off that layer so that I could integrate the Swedish person and also start integrating the food monster. So I took up
Yeah.
writing again because the writing had been dormant and I'd hit a point where I didn't know how to move forward. And I have friends that work in the book industry, and I spoke to them about it. And after a while, she said to me, "Well, because I said I'm not. This book isn't finished yet. I know that it will be finished, and I want it finished. I don't know yet whether I want it published, so I don't want to speak to publishing companies yet. Want
Mhm.
to wrap it up. I want to be proud of something and I want to be able to say, yes, I completed that. I closed this chapter and the book. So I took help
Mhm.
from you can hire privately people that were like almost like editorial managers. So I hired somebody and I met with him 3 times. And because I thought,
Mhm.
oh my goodness, I have such a long way before it's completed. And it wasn't. We only met, we worked together for 4 months. I met him 3 times and I had tasks in between meeting. And after the third session, it took me another 2 weeks and then I was done. And that was in 2019. Uh, so
Oh,
2019, early 2020. So just when the pandemic and everything started. Uh,
so it's like a little bit of a transformational, the journey to write the book was also your transformation through healing, right? So it took quite some
it
time
did.
to
It
do to
really
get
did.
there.
And then there were so many things.
Yeah.
I also had to sit on the complete work for quite a while before because in the beginning I just thought, well, I don't want to publish it because I don't want it to be, oh, here you go. You treated me so badly when I was little, so now you're going to get it back.
Mm.
I didn't want it to come from that point of view. Like I wanted to be free of any kind of negative, not negative feedback, because you can always get negative feedback. But I didn't want it to be an act of
From
childishness. Do you know what I mean?
yeah, from a small place.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So I sat on it and I talked to my husband, I talked to a few of my best friends, and they read it and they were like you. They just said, oh my God, I didn't realize that it was even at this extent. You've hidden so much from us as
Mm.
well. And I said, well, I did because I didn't even know that I was hiding it. So I was hiding it from everyone, myself included. And
Yeah.
then I started talking to my husband. At the time, he worked for a company that works with NGOs. So I started talking to a woman who worked at that company as well. And
Mhm.
we started talking about the fact that I'd written this in my background. And she said, well, have you ever considered maybe publishing the book and doing it as that you can support this or that NGO? Like I'm happy to put you in touch with the people there. And suddenly there was another reason for having written this book. Do you know what I mean? It suddenly wasn't just
Yeah.
about me. It was more a case of, oh, wow, of course, that is it. This is my luggage. I have dropped it. It's healed. But the experience, I can draw on that experience and show others how
Yeah.
to move
Yeah.
forward, what worked for me, try this, what. So that's been that was a major turning point for me.
And what was the after you published it, how was it from the audience perspective and from your family perspective, if they reached you, if you want to share,
Yeah,
of
yeah, yeah.
course?
Thank you. Well, lots of good questions. I'm not in touch with my mother. She's still alive. I'm quite amazed at the fact that her body is still functioning, but it is. And my youngest uncle, who is her half brother and way younger than my mother, he's such a diplomat. He keeps in touch with everyone. He's like a spider in the net.
Mhm.
So he reports back to me from time to time and says, "Yeah, no, she is still, I mean, she's not in great health, but she's still around." So we're not in touch. For lots of different reasons, but she's toxic. So I can't really have her in my life because it pulls everything, it just distorts everything in my life. So
Yeah.
we're not in touch at all. So I had no issues with publishing the book from her point of view. And also, everyone in the book is anonymized. So there are no names at all. The only name that is
Good.
displayed is mine. And because I'm married, my surname is no longer what it used to be. So there's no way to connect me to my mother or my father or my brother unless you
Yeah.
know who they are.
Yeah.
So
And that's not the point either.
no,
Well, like as a reader, I don't care who they are, But I understand what you're saying. You're very kind to conceal their anonymity because you also did not try to point out fingers. You were trying to talk about your story, share it with the world, and help others heal from similar
yeah,
situations. That's the
yeah,
point here,
that's
right?
exactly so. And that was very important to me, and it still is actually. So yeah, from
Hmm.
my mother point of view, I was like, no, that's not so important. But my father, my biological father, I was a bit like, he's not on
Okay.
social media, but he has siblings. He has a lot of siblings. And they're all on social media and we're, friends on Facebook. So I thought, oh my God, I don't want him to find out from one of his siblings or friends that I've written an autobiography and tell him about it. I have to tell him before it's published. So here's the interesting thing about my and it's quite funny actually. He he knows about this book. So I warned him and I said to him, "Oh, just to let you know that I've written a book. It's an autobiography and it supports this Swedish NGO and yeah, it's going to come out, And he said, "Oh, well, so when is it coming out?" And I said, later on in the year in June. And he said, "Oh, I should read it then." I said, "Well, you don't." And I was completely honest here. And I said to him, "You know what? You don't actually have to read it. I just want you to know that it's coming out so that if you hear from it from one of your siblings, then you know about it. You don't feel like stabbed in the back." But I said, "But honestly, I really don't want you to read it because I think it will stir up a lot of stuff in you as well."
Yeah.
And he was like, "Oh, right, right, right. I see. Well, no, of course I want to read it. You've written it." And he still hasn't because he keeps forgetting about the book. So he's reminded at times from friends and siblings. And my eldest daughter, she's a bit cheeky. So she goes, "Oh, that photograph that you have in your bedroom is the same photograph that my mother has on the cover of her book." And I'm like, "Do you have?"
Oh,
She's
wow.
so cheeky. And he goes, so he's been reminded of this several times. And the last time he was reminded, he looked at me and he said, "Well, I'm still waiting for you to give me a book." And I said,
Hmm.
and I looked at him and I thought, "You cheeky bugger." And I said, "You know what? I actually think that you could buy one. If you're really interested in reading it, then it's not for me to give you a copy. This is hard earned.
Yeah.
All of the words on those pages are hard earned. You can afford to buy a
Yeah.
copy." And he's like, yes. And he's forgotten about it again. So he won't read it. My mother found out about the book by accident because I was interviewed I live outside
Yeah.
Stockholm. I was interviewed by the local newspaper here and a big spread. And after the interview was done, the journalist phoned me up and she said, "Oh, we've run the editorial, meeting this week about the articles coming out next week." And I was reminded of the fact that because your mother isn't dead, we need to get her input. She needs to be allowed to be heard. It's a legal thing. You can be sued if you don't as a newspaper. And instantly that put the fear of God in me. I had a minor panic attack. And
Hmm.
because so she said, "Do you have any contact details for her?" And I said, well, I know where she lives and I know her surname because she's also married. So, and she thought, oh, okay, well, that will help. So I said, well, can you promise me that you'll get back to me after you've spoken to her and see what and tell me what she says or what she said? And she said, yes, absolutely. So she did. The journalist came back to me and she said, well, it took a while before I got hold of her. I had to leave a few messages, but I did speak to her in the end. And she was very, I can sort of see what she said, but it was very, it wasn't dramatic at all, but she was very sarcastic and quite harsh. And she'd said something along the lines of, yes, I can confirm that I'm Erica's mother. Yes, I can just imagine what type of book she would write. And no, I have no further comments. So
Oh,
that
wow.
was her input. But of course, since then, she listens to audiobooks. And I have read, I'm the voice for the Swedish audiobook. Um,
Yeah.
she has listened to it because my brother, another different story, God, my younger brother, he contacted me a year and a half ago or so on Messenger because we're not in touch either. And he bombarded me with very threatening and hateful comments, but comments that made me understand that not only has my mother listened to the audiobook, but my brother has listened to the audiobook, which after I had sort of integrated all of the feelings of him contacting me in such a horrible way, it was sort of bittersweet too, that they
Yeah.
had listened to my voice recounting a
Yeah.
story that they don't want to hear. None of them want to listen
Yeah.
to. So yeah, so that so much for my immediate family when it comes.
Wow. And the audience, did how did they perceive your
I have,
book?
as far as I'm aware, I have only received positive comments from it, mainly along the lines of people that know me socially have been surprised because obviously I've always had a very happy experience. That
Mhm.
was very important to me to have a very happy and good facade, pretending that all the darkness didn't exist. And a lady that I know, she bought 7 books and had it in as part of her book club at work. Yeah,
Oh,
which was
wow.
amazing to me. And then the Swedish NGO that the book is supporting, they support the book. They read huge excerpts of the book and said, we are reminded of stories that they hear, that they come across, unfortunately, on a
Yeah.
weekly basis. So they said, your book is still relevant and very important. So only positive feedback, really. Some are shocked,
Yeah. Yeah.
for a reader or a listener that listens to the audiobook is new. And I think to a certain degree, we all have experiences in our lives that were less than ideal. It could be
Absolutely.
your upbringing, but it could also be that you were perhaps sexually abused or we all have those experiences, or we know
Yeah.
someone close to us that had that experience. Why I think it's important to talk about again is because I had the experience of trying to make it into separate entities and sort of push it out of my psyche. But I think,
Mm.
that was a survival strategy when things were too intense. But ultimately, I think the opposite needs to be done. We need to integrate everything that happens to us
Mhm.
because I don't want to say that it happens for a reason because it sounds so lofty
Cliché.
but
Yeah.
it's for me, for instance, when I say that I was, in an abusive relationship with a man for over 5 years, people are, what? Why? Oh, how horrible. And I'm like, I know it was, but I can see it so
Because you
clearly now. The upbringing laid the foundation for that controlling that took place because I had no sense of self. I had no sense of who I was and what my sane and healthy reactions were. They were
yeah.
eradicated. Um, so
Yeah.
it's only
Yeah.
when you start sort of assimilating all of that baggage into your psyche that you can heal. Because we're all perpetrators.
Yeah.
If we don't heal, we become perpetrators in one way or
Yeah.
another.
And going back to a full circle now, coming back to the
Mm.
now, when did the healing process started? How did it start? And what was the impact also of your partner? Because you talk about him, your husband, he's very sweet, very supportive. I would even say he's therapeutic to
Yeah,
you. So, how did you start healing? Yeah, tell me a little bit about this
thank you.
process.
Well, I almost see it like I'm an egg that started to have like a crack in the facade. And the initial crack in the facade came in 2004, and I was out working as a lead singer on a cruise ship. You know, cruise ships have entertainment on board, and I was the lead singer in the musical theatre team. And there were
Hmm.
Swedish people in that team as well. We're quite a big team. But the Swedes that I hang out with were Swedes that were similar to me, i.e., they lived in London, they spoke English like I did, and they weren't particularly Swedish. Because remember, at this point, I was still sort of ashamed of my Swedishness. I wanted to be a Londoner. I was a Londoner. Everything was England, England, England. I was a complete Anglophile. So what happened
Hmm.
during this cruise was that at this point, I was officially engaged to this abusive man who was still at home in London, but I was away, and little by little, every time I was away from this man, I started to become more like myself and started to enjoy just social activities, going for coffee with people, enjoying
Hmm.
being on stage and whatever. And there was this Swedish guy on board the ship. He was quite good looking, but I didn't really see that because he was Swedish. Hello. And another girl who worked in the entertainment team, she was the hostess for all the Scandinavians on board the ship because a lot of guests were Scandinavians. And she once said to me, she said, "Oh, why don't you come over? You know, this guy, he has a very old but very funny Swedish film on his computer, and we've decided to just have a film night in his cabin. Do you want to come?" And normally I would say no, right? Out of pure instinct, like, no, it was Swedish, hello. But this film is such a classic. And I remember the first time I saw it. So it was the film that made me go, oh, that'd be fun to see, actually. So I said yes. And I hung out in the cabin. And suddenly, you know, the guy whose cabin it was and whose film it was, he was he was quite nice, you know. Oh, okay, just a normal regular guy. And that was the starting point because little by little, he sort of befriended me in a very soft way.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
eventually, I didn't realize that I was falling in love with him. He knew, but I
Hmm.
didn't. And also, I was engaged, remember, to this guy in England. So,
Yeah.
but the our first hug, our first romantic thing that happened, it blew my mind because I was 30 at that point, 30 or 31. And up until that point, I was convinced that I couldn't feel, that I wasn't, that I was asexual, that I just didn't have, you know, any kind of, that
Oh.
I couldn't feel any physical sensations because I'd had boyfriends and I wasn't a virgin, but I'd never felt anything. So I just assumed that all of that fairy tale, wow, it feels amazing when he hugs me. It wasn't for me. And suddenly, when this guy hugged me, it was like fireworks. So it was so many different shocks at the same time. It was fireworks when he touched me, which made me go, I'm not
What?
asexual. I've only been with the wrong guys, and I'm currently engaged to someone who obviously also is a wrong. You know, it was so many realizations all at once. So he set the bar. He was a nice regular guy. We didn't have anything much more in common apart from the little social bubble that exists on a cruise ship. But I'm forever grateful for having met him. And for me, he was definitely the catalyst that catapulted me into healing because what happened then, and I'm sure they are connected, even though at the time when my autoimmune illness broke through, when it developed, it only happened like 2 weeks after I had become lovers with this Swedish guy on board the ship. I then saw it as a punishment for having done something wrong, right? Because I was unfaithful to my fiance in London.
Mhm.
Today, I think I wasn't punished. It was another part of the healing puzzle because that autoimmune illness, it forced me to take a look at my life in a way that I hadn't done at that point. And I also think that last final bit, that the romantic, the beautiful feelings that suddenly had started to emerge, that was the last thing that broke the camel's back because it was just my body was full of so much tension, of so much stress and so much tension that even though it was a lovely feeling to experience that I'm not asexual, I can feel it feels good
Yeah.
when the right person touches me and hugs me. For my body, it was just too much. So from then on, so I would say that that healing was kickstarted in 2004. Um, and around the end of late 2007, 2008, I had dealt with the autoimmune illness, and I was on medication at that point, and I was sort of back to being able to move and whatever. But 3 years later, that's when I realized that the autoimmune illness was only the tip of the iceberg, that the self harm
Mm.
and the eating disorder was a major knot that I had yet to unravel. And that started with applying to this clinic, doing that program, and then continuing to work after that program with my therapist one on one.
It's very interesting what you're saying about the guy in the boat. I think was interesting that it was almost like a portal. He opened the
Yeah.
portal to your the sensitive part of your soul that you probably might haven't experienced up until then. It doesn't matter if you have been in a dysfunctional family, even if you're in a normal family, it takes some time to meet someone who can create all those feelings on you. And that portal was still open. And then you met your
Yeah,
partner, your husband, and that portal was still there. So it's beautiful to see
it is. It actually
um
makes me
all of
teary
this
eyed
when
because,
yeah, I
yeah,
see.
because I still, this is, that to me was a huge moment of grace. You know, sometimes we have
Yeah.
luck in our lives, and other times we can create things and manifest ourselves through changing our thoughts and behavior. But this was a moment of grace for me when I
Mm.
did take that plunge, and I realized that yes, the portal was open, and he was another pair of correct arms to be in. We haven't really been apart since.
Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
so it was definitely right for sure. And he's such a
Beautiful.
great person. I really love him.
I'm really happy that we're finishing this conversation in a positive note because I don't want people to just get on the negative part. It's definitely something that a lot of people have experienced. As you said, it's still a relatable topic that people talk about it to this day. Um, I like that you talking about your healing journey. I like that you're emotional about it and you're vulnerable about it because doesn't mean that we have to show this persona of I'm strong, nothing beats me, I won. We are humans. It's okay to be vulnerable
Yeah.
right now. So closing this beautiful conversation that we had, I wanted to ask you if you're planning to write another book. What are your projects right now? What do you have in mind?
I will be writing another book, but I don't know when it's going to come out. And it's not
Mhm.
really defined yet. It's floating in my psyche, but I'm not prepared to say what that floaty cloud is just yet because it's still a little bit too loose. But yeah, there are more books in my system that will be born one day. But up until then, I still work as an actress and a singer. I've come back to that. I've also healed from my autoimmune illness, which is amazing. So I'm no longer on medication or anything like that, which is great. Um, so I work as a lecturer. So I lecture with a book. I also lecture for a Swedish organization that, talks about and supports people that are suffering from self-harm and eating disorders, but also families, so that
Hmm.
you can be the best support that you can be for those who suffer. And I also teach. I work with actors and managers and management teams and help them with presentations online and presentations in the physical room, and being better at getting up and talking. And especially when it comes to not having English as your first language, there are difficulties that we stumble across. And if you're not aware of those difficulties and where you stumble, you can sometimes lose an audience and be made fun of behind your back. And so I help management teams sort of catch all of
Yeah.
that and integrate and make better, as it were.
Nice, nice. I'll definitely. I think I would benefit from your presentation skills class because when I started doing the podcast, Google was saying, "Do you want to improve your vocabulary?" And I'm like, Is my vocabulary bad? What is Google trying to tell me right now?" But definitely, I want to thank you for today. I had a good time talking to you. I think that it's a very important topic that we covered today. And I really hope to see you soon again on the
Thank you very
show.
much. And thank you for having me. It's been great. Thank you.
If you are still here, if you're until the end of this episode, thank you so much for being here. If you want to show your love, you can simply subscribe to this channel. And of course, make sure to follow us on Instagram and share this episode with someone you really love, you really care, and you think it will make an impact to them or to the world. Now, thanks so much for being here and see you next time.